This question may be found in some historic events that took place almost a century ago, when official medicine finally managed to gain the upper hand on the so-called empirical doctors, who cured patients with herbs and natural remedies.
In the 1800s, society sanctioned both approaches to healing. Patients had a choice of using either doctors, called allopaths, or natural healers, called empirics or homeopaths. The two groups waged a bitter philosophical debate. The allopathic doctors called their approach heroic medicine. They believed the physician must aggressively drive disease from the body. They based their practice on what they considered scientific theory. The allopaths used three main techniques. They bled the body to drain out the bad humors. They gave huge doses of toxic minerals like mercury and lead to displace the original disease. They also used surgery, but it was a brutal procedure before anesthesia and infection control. Few patients were willing to have surgery. Most patients feared allopathic methods altogether. Satirists of the day remarked that with allopathic treatment, the patient died of the cure. Competing with the doctors were the empiric healers. Contrary to the doctors, they believed in stimulating the body's own defenses to heal itself. Instead of poisonous minerals, they used vegetable products and non-toxic substances in small quantities. They especially favored herbs, learned from Native American and old European traditions. The empirics said they based their remedies not on theory, but on observation and experience. Satirists of the day added that with empiric treatment, the patient died of the disease, not the cure. And the balance of medical power remained equal until the turn of the century. Then, new medical treatments emerged that were potentially very profitable. The AMA joined with strong financial forces to transform medicine into an industry. The fortunes of Carnegie, Morgan, and Rockefeller financed surgery, radiation, and synthetic drugs. They were to become the economic foundations of the new medical economy.
The takeover of the medical industry was accomplished by the takeover of the medical schools. Well, the people that we're talking about, Rockefeller and Carnegie in particular, came to the picture and said, we will put up money. They offered tremendous amounts of money to the schools that would agree to cooperate with them. The donors said to the schools, we're giving you all this money. Now, would it be too much to ask if we could put some of our people on your board of directors to see that our money is being spent wisely? Almost overnight, all of the major universities received large grants from these sources and also accepted 1, 2, or 3 of these people that I mentioned on their board of directors, and the schools literally were taken over by the financial interests that put up the money. Now, what happened as a result of that is that the schools did receive an infusion of money. They were able to build new buildings. They were able to add expensive equipment to their laboratories. They were able to hire top-notch teachers. But at the same time as doing that, they skewed the whole thing in the direction of pharmaceutical drugs. That was the efficiency in philanthropy. The doctors from that point forward in history would be taught pharmaceutical drugs. All of the great teaching institutions in America were captured by the pharmaceutical interests in this fashion. And it's amazing how little money it really took to do it.
Surgery became viable with anesthesia and infection control, and doctors advocated expensive, radical operations. These in turn produced the need for a large, lucrative hospital system. Radium fever swept medicine. The price of radium rose 1,000% almost overnight. Another costly technological industry entered the hospital system. A drug industry grew out of the booming patent medicine business. The doctors changed educational standards and licensing regulations to exclude the empirics. Soon, only AMA-approved doctors could legally practice medicine. In a brief 20 years, the AMA came to dominate medical practice. Organized Medicine launched a media campaign to associate the empirics with quacks. The code word for competition was quackery.
So now the average doctor goes through school, he gets a great education, he has to be really smart to get through it, he learns all about drugs, he doesn't know too much about basic nutrition. I found that the average wife of these physicians knows more about nutrition than he does, but they sure know their drugs. And if you go to your typical doctor today, I don't care what it is, chances are you're going to walk out of there with a prescription. Why? Because that's what he has been trained to do.
Which we are humbled by.
About 100 years ago, things were really beginning to change in the United States. We were changing from an agrarian economy to an industrial economy. Titans of industry really wanted to be able to control the world financial system as a whole. When the Rockefellers took over the allopathic medicine, there were many types of medical education in the United States. There were homeopathic doctors and there were naturopathic doctors who were using natural medicines to heal, and they were having very good outcomes. Once the Rockefellers took over the system, they closed down those other schools and they only promoted the sale of their drugs, they promoted surgery, and they promoted radiation. The Rockefellers were also in charge of the oil industry and the chemical industry, and they also made an alliance with a huge German concern called IG Farben, which was a big chemical industry in Germany. The Food and Drug Administration was started in the 1930s, and it was sold to the people of the United States as an agency that was going to protect its food and drug supply. And of course, in the early part of the century, people wrote about some of the terrible things that were happening with the meat packing industry and in the food industry in general.
Patented drugs were being advertised all over. And then there were, nostrums were considered secret formulas. And there usually were proprietary formulas. So they got all these addictive drugs in there. And they weren't even listing them on the label. So people were thinking heroin and cocaine, morphine and other types of opiates. And they weren't being told that they're even on the label. So they forced a labeling.
There was a lot of mischief going on in the food industry, and the FDA was set up to correct that problem. They evolved into regulating drugs, medical devices, and at this point they regulate just about anything that goes into the human body.
In the 1930s, 1938, the FDA became a monster. And from that point forward, it has grown by leaps and bounds until the 60s, when it acquired jurisdiction over both safety and efficacy of drugs.
Then in 1938, they passed a law under Franklin Roosevelt defining a new drug, safe and effective for prevention, treatment, mitigation of disease, whatever. The FDA basically appointed itself as the experts. Senator Estes Kefauver sponsored an amendment that was passed, expanding the authority of the FDA to go beyond the safety of new drugs to the effectiveness of new drugs. And that was signed into law on October 10, 1962 by John Kennedy.
At that point, the FDA was largely captive of industry. The FDA does no clinical testing of drugs itself. It relies entirely on submissions made to it by the drug companies. This would appear to the average person to be a gross conflict of interest, and in fact it is.